Hello students, welcome to the lecture on graph cut segmentation. The slides are based on Professor Yuri Boykov. We discussed about many segmentation techniques: region growing, thresholding, intelligent scissors or live wire, active contours, snakes. We did not discuss about watersheds, geodesic active contours based on level sets, and graph cuts, which we are going to discuss today, and this we are not going to discuss. Out of these, what are the techniques that are boundary based, what are the techniques that are region based, what are the techniques that are both region and boundary based, and this slide shows that. So you can see region growing works on a boundary because it tries to add pixels until it meets the boundary. Intelligent scissors, we draw the boundary. Active contours, of course it is based on the initial contour that we draw, and watersheds are also based on boundaries. Thresholding actually is a region-based one, and if you think about geodesics, both the region and boundary are involved. You saw that in the Chan-Vesey segmentation that we were able to fit a piecewise constant model, so therefore the area and the length of those segmentation parts can be considered. So graph cuts also is like that, and they can incorporate many other terms into the segmentation. So out of these are the ones that are optimization based. You can see watersheds has no optimization, but you can see intelligent scissors which uses Dijkstra's, and this one which uses either gradient descent or dynamic programming have an optimization behind them. So geodesic active contours use level sets optimization, and these MRF energies that are minimized through graph cuts use graph cut optimization. Okay, these are Professor Olga Wexler and Yuri Boykov. I had the fortune of studying under them, especially Professor Boykov is a very, very nice man. Their paper, the initial paper, I think you know, have close to 9,000 citations now. So now let's look at this simple graph which you may have studied under your algorithms. So it has a source and the sink, and there are nodes that are connected using directed edges in this case. They can be directed or undirected, but these are directed edges. So a cut means you separate the source from the sink. So you can see if you cut this, this and this, no water can now flow from the source to the sink. So if you have cut these or severed these three edges, the cost of the cut is 8. So you can use this graph cuts algorithm. So actually it uses the max flow algorithm to find the minimum cut. Gives you this cut. So using this cut, since you are able to separate the source nodes and the sink nodes, so nodes that are connected to the source and nodes that are connected to the sink, we actually have a binary segmentation. We can do many more things, but this is the very basics of using graph cuts for segmentation, which can be used to many other things. Okay, so we will go through many things. So first of all, shortest path on 2D graphs, and this is actually doable using graph cuts. So we have, for example, now we have two regions, this region and that region, and you can separate them using by constructing a graph and severing the connections. So this can be done using the shortest path algorithm. What we do is we find one point there and then compute the shortest path from P to P, and then that we have a cut and we have separated the two regions. Repeat for all points on the gray line, then choose the optimal contour. In graph cuts approach, this is done in actually one shot. So compute the minimum cut that separates a red region from the blue region, like so. Okay, so there are cuts of the directed graphs as we saw earlier, and cost of the cut includes only edges from the source to sink components. Cuts cost on directed graph changes if the terminals are swept. and this is actually equal to swapping S and T terminals. So we will not look at this concept too much in the lecture, but in the implementation you see you have the power using the code to implement directed graphs. Okay, it's like switching the surface orientation. Okay, so a brief look at how this algorithm works that Boykov and Kolmogorov have implemented, and you are using that. You will use that in running the code and your assignments. So goal is to divide the graph into two parts, separating red and blue nodes, source and the sink. So this is the ST graph cut. Cut is a sum. The cut cost is a sum of served edges. So cost of this edge, this edge, this edge, and that edge. So after this cut happens, in one convention you see that this node, and this node belong to the source, and the other nodes belong to the sink. You can take it the other way around also. Minimum cost ST cut can be found in polynomial time. So there are many algorithms. So augmenting paths is the algorithm that is used in the code given, and push, relabel, and preflow are some other algorithms. I do not know much about those. Okay, augmenting paths. So starting from the source to the sink, we send water. Find a path from S to T along non-saturated edges. So these edges, shown by the thickness of them, have a capacity. So although this edge has high capacity, you cannot send that much water through this path because these other edges are thin. So like that. So now we find the edges that saturate. Increase the flow along this path until some edges saturate. Then find the next path, and so on. So when you find these paths, you increase the flow until edges saturate. Iterate until all paths from S and T have at least one saturated edge. And those saturated edges are the edges that are served, and this max flow is equal to the min cut according to some theorem. I think it's called Ford-Fulkerson theorem. Okay, these problems have been solved in many other contexts also, especially from in transporting goods from one place to the other and finding the most effective path. Okay, so after this graph cuts paper, they had a Boykov and Joly paper that spoke about segmentation. So in most of the slides, that paper will be used. So when you have an image like this, now you see this image is a 3 by 3 image. It's a 3 by 3 image. For every single node, for every single pixel, you initialize a node. And you can see now this pixel and that pixel are sort of similar. Therefore, cutting that edge must be hard. So therefore, you assign a thicker edge for that. And this pixel and this pixel are different. Their contrast is high. So therefore, you add a thinner edge. So this concept, adding a cost that is an inverse measure of the gradient, was used in previous contexts also. We use that in intelligent scissors, we use that in snakes, and we use that in Chan-Messi algorithm and Leibniz also. Okay. So this is a function that you can use for that. So to weigh the edges, you can take e to the power of the intensity difference divided by some sigma squared value. So you can see if the intensity difference is small, you have high cost. And when the intensity difference is large, you have low cost. Okay, then you pick manually source and the sink. Some pixel that belongs to the object and some pixel that belongs to the background. And then the graph is constructed like that. So these two edges that are shown in the thick red edge, this one, and this edge, thick blue edge, cannot be cut. They cannot be cut. So that means this pixel will belong to the T segment, and this pixel will belong to the S segment. So you are finding a cut through this. So when you find a cut, you have a segmentation that corresponds to this. You can see that here in the graph. So I think now you understand, if you have an algorithm that you can find the minimum cut, how to segment images by clicking two pixels. One pixel that belongs to the object, one pixel that belongs to the background. You can have more than one pixel clicked in this case. So now these are called T-links, and these are called N-links. T-links and N-links. These are called T-links and N-links. Okay, and that's something that you need to remember. Links between nodes in the graph that correspond to pixels we call N-links. Links that are connected to the source and the sink are called T-links. Okay, minimum cost cut can be computed in polynomial time using this max-flow min-cut algorithm, and then you have the segmentation. Okay, so just let's compare this with geodesic contours now. In the geodesic contours, the idea is what? It's a weighted addition of the cost. So therefore, when the path goes through the high contrast edges, the cost is low. That kind of a thing. So Chan is there, but this is not exactly Chan-Visi algorithm. But this we have studied this paper now. Now, if you have a graph constructed like that, and if it cuts, and if we add these weights of the edges that belong to a cut means now the label assigned to one pixel P is different from the label assigned to the other pixel neighboring that. For example, if we take these two, there is no cut going through that, and the labels will be the same. But if we take these two, you can see the cut goes through that, because you can see the red and gray pixels are there, so cut will go through that, and then that will be cut, and then that will have a cost. So you see the edges that are severed contributes to the cost of the cut, and for those edges the WPQ is considered and added into the cut. So therefore you can see when you take the cut, cost of the cut corresponds to this kind of a cost along the path. So that's very similar. Both incorporate segmentation, boundary smoothness and alignment to image edges. So since we are trying to minimize this cost, you will not have a very wiggly edge but a smoother edge. Okay, so now you can see the meaning of that when the cut is seen as that. Okay, so graph cut on a grid and boundary of S. So there are labels for each pixel P. You can have a label either 0 or 1. So this is binary. It's a binary thing. So the cost of the cut will be the summation of all edges that are in the contour, that are severed, actually, that are cut. Severed N-links can approximate geometric length of the contour C. The result of the fundamental relies on the integral geometry, so also known as probabilistic geometry. So there is a paper for this ICCP 2003 paper, what costs can be minimized via graph cuts, I think. So that has more details on this, but we are not worried about that right now. Okay, so let's look at briefly level sets and the boundary the level sets can have. Now you can see in the level set function, so if u is this level set function, and this is the 0 level set or the curve, you can see level set functions has a height. So we have used phi as that symbol. So you can see the heights here are shown as numbers. So you can see the exact boundary can be found with subpixel accuracy. A contour may be approximated from uxy with subpixel accuracy. But in graph cuts it's either 0 or 1 labeling. So therefore this is actually the contour, and is this a contour to be reconstructed from binary labels SP? So answer is no. There can be many. There are many contours satisfying interior exterior labeling of the points. So you cannot get a subpixel accurate contour in this case. So briefly summarizing the contour surface representation. So both graph cuts and level sets have implicit representation. That means we do not represent the curve as parametric curve, but represent the curve as in level sets, a level set function, the 0 level set of the level set function. In the graph cuts, minimum cost cut. So the server edges. So geodesic active contours is a great example for that. Explicit boundary is used in snakes and live wire. So what else besides boundary length can be found via graph cuts? There are many other things. There is a slide at the very end to discuss about that. Okay. So in this case, in this 2001 paper, we go from just clicking couple of seeds to more general regional constraints. Now think about the Chan-Vesey algorithm where we fit the piecewise constant function, one label for the object, one label for the background. So each pixel may like to belong to either the object or the background based on its intensity, for example. So assume that we know this C1 and C2, for example, in the Chan-Vesey algorithm. Assume that IS and IT are known, expected intensities of the object and the background. Then you can compute these costs, dps as IP minus IS modulus, dpt as IP minus IT modulus. So what does this mean? So pixel P, dp means pixel P, does it like to belong to S? It is this. So dpt, does it like to belong to T, IP minus IT? Okay, so now you can see, if you know these IS and IT constant intensities of the object and the background, then we can compute the costs, whether a pixel would like to belong to the background or whether it would like to belong to the object. So these are the T-links that we construct. So for each pixel, we'll have a T-link DPS and a DPT for the same pixel, a DPS and a DPT. So now you know how to compute those things if you know these two things. Now, for example, assume that you want to restore a given image. Maybe you have a faxed image and then letters are corrupted. You know that the letters must be black and the background must be white. So therefore, IS and IT are known in this case, 255 and 0. So based on that, you can assign these costs. So then you find the minimum cut that serves these edges, and it will serve some T-links also, not only N-links, it will serve some T-links also, and then that will be the cost, and then you have segmentation. So now let's look at this cost. The cost of the cut would be the cost of the server T-links. That will be this term and that's this term, this term and this term, and the cost of the server N-links or the edge costs. So those edge costs will be there for this, 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 and so on. So those costs will be there. These ones you can see the DPS values. They are considered in this for pixels that belong to S and for pixels that belong to S prime, S bar actually, S bar. So you can see these two regions. So I hope you understand the cost function that comes out of that. Okay, now if you do not know IS and IT, that means the intensities of the object and background are unknown actually, the constant intensities. So which is actually the Chan-Vesey model. You can see in the Chan-Vesey model when we ran that it found C1 and C2. So there in this case we re-estimate, sorry, this must be IS and IT based on the current segmentation. So the T-links, I think you know how to compute them, and then IS and IT will also have to be estimated. So this is called block coordinate descent. So there you have to iterate between finding the segmentation S and computing IS and IT. Okay, so this is how that happens. So minimize over labeling S for fixed I0 and I1. So we fix I0 and I1 based on the currently given user input. Assume that user says, okay, these are the objects that may belong to the object and these are the pixels that may belong to the background, or some thresholding technique that you use as the initialization. So some initialization must be there, some reasonable initialization. Based on that, we find an initial segmentation. Based on that initial segmentation, we have the object and the background. So from that object and the background, we can estimate I naught hat and I1 hat, those two intensities as the averages. Yeah, you can see it's the average, all pixels added together and divided by the number of pixels in that area, S bar and S. So we know these two, and since we know these two, we can find optimum. L can be found using the graph cuts. L means a labeling. Labeling can be found using graph cuts. So that means each pixel, whether it would get the label 0 or label 1. So then after that, you minimize over I naught and I1 based on these yeah, it's a simple minimization. You can find the squared array inside the object and background segments, which would give actually this would be the answer. So you have to alternate between these two. When you alternate between these two, you will find good segmentation. Okay, so if you look at Chan-Vassi segmentation in this language, it is this. You can see that I naught, I1, IP squared, that's the cost of Chan-Vassi segmentation. So it computes this actually. So this is C, I don't know whether it's C1 or C2, I'll call it C2, and this is C1. So the difference between those and the cost of the edge. So we can have Chan-Vassi multiple labels also. So you can see rather than having just two labels, you can have multiple labels as well. So that would result reducing the color depth kind of an image. But without this term, what would happen? Without this term, the boundaries will not try to be regular, or the boundaries will not try to be shorter in length. So therefore, boundaries will be wiggly. So it will be like just k-means clustering without that regularization term. Okay. So this, I don't know how to talk about it. Okay. So now we just computed dp and ds using some formulas. Now we can use likelihoods for those. Appearance models can be given by intensity distributions of object and background. So this is what you would be implementing as your assignment. So based on an initial segmentation that you get, you would estimate DPS and DPT. The probability of that pixel belonging to the segment S and probability of that pixel belonging to segment T. S bar and S. Okay, the similar ideas, and you can see the cost of the server T-links would be now minus log probability IP belonging to S and minus log probability IP belonging to T based on their belongingness in the final segmentation. Whether they belong to, if they belong to S, then you use this term. They belong to S bar, then you use this term. This is the cost of the server edges. Okay, now let's take an example that would happen in this case. Now think about this as the image. This is the image. So as a human being, you know that this is the object. This is sort of the object. Now think about this. In the object, there are some black pixels. So if the object is red, you can see it's dark. As a ratio, dark pixels are very small, bright pixels are high but not 100%. If you take the background, dark pixels are 100%, bright pixels are 0. So this is the probability that you would have for the background and the foreground based on some initial segmentation that you give. Maybe you can draw a rectangle like that as the initial segmentation. Some rectangle like that, that's good enough. Then the final cut would be like this. So this intensity histogram or the probability density function you have to estimate on your own. Okay, so a little more details about the costs. So when you say segmentation is equal to the cut, so the labels are either 0 or 1. So you can see S bar and S. So T links and N links are shown. These are the N links and these are the T links. So cost of the server T links would be dp1 plus dp0. We take dp1 when p belongs to S. You take dp0 when p belongs to S prime. So for PQ who are neighbors, we will add the WPQ is if the two neighboring pixels labels that are assigned through graph cuts is different. Actually now we don't worry about these things when you actually run graph cuts, but this is the cost that you would get. This is the cost of the cut. So you can write it as DPSP also. So they are called unary terms and these are called pairwise terms. So these give you the regional properties and this give you the boundary properties. So regional properties means now you can see if all these T links are cut, they sort of add these values. Actually these are the ones that are cut, thin ones. They sort of add the T links together. In this case you can see these are added together. Okay, so let's look at an example. Take the llama as an example. So this is the segmentation, the final segmentation. Yes, and now you can see probability of the pixels if they are in the foreground is let's say this blue one. Probability of pixels if they are in the background is this one. So for every pixel that you would give, then you will have the two probabilities, this probability and that probability. So you can get the two numbers and you can get the log ratio whether if it belong to foreground, the probability, whether it belongs to background probability, and then you can get the negative log ratio. If you plot that, you would have something like this. So this itself is a segmentation, but this is like thresholding. This is like thresholding. So you would get something like this. Llama is there, but a lot of noise. Why? There is no boundary term. We did not consider the length of the boundary in this case. So it is just taking the cost of the segmentation, this sum of FP, this term. Now we can consider that as a dot product also. I will not go into the details, so it's a linear term. Then if we add the boundary term, this is what you are going to get through the graph cuts. So you can see you can get a nice boundary, and this noise is cancelled. Also at edge you have to consider do something about the fur to get a beautiful segmentation out of that, which you can paste into a picture. Okay, then we'll look at the Maxflow code. Yes, so this is the place to find this code. Pip install PyMaxFlow, and this is a Python implementation, Python wrapper to the code by Kolmogorov and Boyko Yuri wrote this code, and the code is here. And this weak algorithm is Boyko Kolmogorov algorithm. So that code. So if you're working with C++, you can use this. And then when you download that in the documentation, you have this. So this is what we considered as the first example. The cost of the cut is 8. So 2 plus 2 plus 4. So you can, in the documentation, you can look at these examples. Now let's see how to construct this graph. So this graph has let's go through the code. G Maxflow graph int. So it's an integer graph. You can use a float graph also. To create a graph with integer capacities. Add two non-terminal nodes. Nodes G dot add nodes 2. two non-terminal nodes. These are the two terminal nodes, S and T. These are the non-terminal nodes. Now we add edges between node 0 and node 1, 1 and 2. These two edges, 1 and 2. If you like to have the same capacities, you can write 1 and 1. Add edges, T edges. Now H means these are end links. These are the end links. T edges means T links. Add edges node 0, 2 and 5, node 0, 2 and 5, and node 1, 9 and 4. So the graph is complete. Then you flow equals G max flow, and then you can print the flow here, and you can get the segments of node 0 and node 1 to which segment they belong, to 0 or 1. So you can see node 0 belongs to 1, node 0 belongs to 1, that means T, and node 1 belongs to 0, that means S. So this is how you run a small graph and obtain the cut like that. So this is the first example. So I am printing those things. So you can see the flow is 8, and you can get the sequence. Okay. Then we can look at the binary restoration example. So there the idea is, now you have an image and it's Gaussian noise corrupt. So what you want to obtain is this. This is the good one that you want to obtain. So you load the image, and these are the costs. So you know that this is the unary term and this is the binary term, and you can have costs like this, pi and 255 minus pi. So defining this one, you have to think about it and do it. So based on the segment that it belongs to. So you have to spend some time to think about it. I will not explain that. So if the labels are different, xi and xj are different, you add some k cost for the neighbors. So so you have max flow graph int 0, then nodes g add grid nodes image dot shape. So that many nodes you add, and then add grid edges node IDs 50. Add node terminal edges with the same capacity. At terminal edges, the imaged pixels are the capacities of the edges from the source node. The inverted image pixels are the capacities of the image to the sink node. So the IMG and 255 minus IMG. So you can see this has been done there. Then you do Gmax flow, and then you get the segments, and you can have this show. So this is binary restoration, so you can see the restored image. So please study this code and understand how this has been done. In the binary restoration example, so you can see all the end links of the same value, in this case 50. So that's the restoration example. Then I have binary segmentation example also. So there you can see I am loading the cameraman image. Then some functions are there to compute the gradient, and then norm of some function, and the stopping function, this inverse measure of the gradient. I think you are familiar with this now. We use that in the Canvas also. So now in this case you have to add n links based on pixel differences. So therefore these two structures are there. Now think about this 0 as a center, here the 0 as a center. So at grid edge node ID structure is this structure, weights, stopping function, gradients 0, and symmetric true. So we'll try to understand what this means. Now I cannot quickly find the documentation for that. Okay, all right. So now see, now structure is this. Now what you mean when you have 1 and 1 there, you locate this 0 here at this location. You locate this 0 here, and then this 1 means you add an east edge, this one toward east. This is south, you add a south one at 1. So like this. So you can see by doing the structure and adding edges using different lines of code successively, you can add these kind of edges. Is what I said correct? I hope it is correct. So add a 3 by 3 grid with different capacities for different positions, not symmetric. So here you have 1 and 1 there, and then you have the weights. Okay, so now assume that you locate this 0 here, and then this is 1, east-wise edge is 1, that 1 you multiply with the number here. So this weights matrix is must be of the size of the image. So 1 and 1 there. Now let's take one more example. Now let's take this node. For this node, weight matrix has 5. That 5 must be added to the east edge and the south edge, and so on. So I hope it is clear now for you. Okay, and then one more, and there you have structure, weights, the symmetric true, that's what I forgot to mention. Here the symmetric is false. When you say symmetric is true, you add the same number there. So this is what I forgot to tell you there, this one. So symmetric is set to true in this case. Okay, so this is how you set the n-links. So here you can see having symmetric false, how you add these things. So you can go through these examples and see how to add these edges, which has been done in this code by finding this stopping function gradient, which we compute as this one, 1 over 1 plus norm of the gradient square. Actually you can Gaussian smooth that gradient beforehand. So when you then you have the so you get the Gmax flow, then you get grid segments and SGMs, then SGM you show it as an image. So this is the segmentation. I think it's quite good. So by tweaking some of these parameters, you can obtain better segmentations. So study this, and you can get a graph cuts done with slightly different or better T-link costs. So those costs are the ones that I showed here. This is doing this is your assignment, and you can do many other things also. Okay, so in summary, we studied about graph cuts. In the graph cut segmentation, you can, in the binary graph cut segmentation, you can divide an image into 2 segments, and there are 2 types of costs. The region-based costs, which are defined by the unary terms, and the edge-based costs, which gradient based costs assigned to servering the edges, actually the T links, actually the N links. So region based costs are for servering T links, boundary costs are for servering N links. So beyond this there are so many things. So the 2001 paper, they had alpha expansions and alpha beta swaps, and you can do multi-labels and so many other things are there. And then finally connection of these to the deep learning based semantic segmentation work also. There is a lot of work done, so you can watch videos and understand these things. Okay, thank you.